The aroma of glazed ham, sage stuffing, and simmering betrayal filled the dining room on that frigid Christmas Eve. It was a sensory collision, the comfort of tradition clashing violently with the acid taste of betrayal. My son, David Vance, stood at the head of the antique maple table, a pedestal he had not earned, his hand aloft with a half-full wine glass. His voice, usually a moderate baritone, cut through the quiet hum of polite conversation and holiday music, raw and absolute. We had extensive discussions, and we've come to a unified conclusion, David announced, his gaze sweeping over the handful of uneasy guests before settling, cold and merciless, on me. Dad, you are formally no longer considered a member of this family unit. You need to vacate this property as soon as is practical. A palpable gasp rippled around the table. The small gathering, my sister's family, a few old neighbors, and Elizabeth's lifelong friend, Sarah, froze, cutlery suspended halfway mouths, eyes wide with horror and disbelief. Beside David, his wife, Lisa, did not flinch. Her posture was impeccable, her smile faint, almost imperceptible, yet it radiated a pure, unsettling triumph. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. I sat opposite them. The patriarch deposed, my stillness a stark contrast to the chaos David had just unleashed. For a moment, the old Julian, the father who always sought peace and reconciliation, flickered. But 32 years of life experience, including a decade building my own engineering firm from nothing, had taught me how to read a structural collapse before the first beam fell. And this structure, the life they had carefully built on my presumed weakness, was about to disintegrate. I returned Lisa's gaze with an unhurried, almost serene smile. It was a mask of composure, concealing the white-hot core of my fury. Without a word, I reached the floor beside my chair, retrieved a plain manila folder, and slid across the polished tabletop toward David. The movement was deliberate, an act of silent theater. "Here is a farewell present for you, son," I said, my voice low, utterly devoid of emotion, yet carrying a weight that forced every eye in the room back to me. David's momentary confidence wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He hesitated, then snatched the folder, his fingers already anticipating a check, a settlement, a surrender. He tore it open carelessly, his eyes scanning the first page of legal text. That was when the composure failed. A high-pitched, strangled sound, half-shout, half-scream, escaped him. David's face, moment ago flushed with the arrogance of victory, immediately drained of all color. He looked like a man who had stared into an abyss and seen his entire future vanish. The papers began to tremble in his grip. The guests, horrified but captivated, watched a sudden, terrifying shift, completely unaware that the elaborate, long-planned retribution of a scorned father had just begun. They thought they had finally defeated me, cornered the sentimental old man, but they were tragically and profoundly mistaken. Before we proceed with the rest of this tale, please consider subscribing to the channel and share your location in the comments below. The tension in the dining room was so thick it seemed to absorb the light from the overhead chandelier. The remnant of the untouched feast, the carved ham, the roasted vegetables, the spilled red wine, sat as silent witnesses to the verbal assault. David stood paralyzed at the head of the table, his earlier grand gesture of authority completely dissolved. "Dad, we are simply demanding the funds," David had snapped 10 minutes earlier, before his dramatic pronouncement. "This property is structurally failing. You cannot justify hoarding your considerable wealth, while we are financially restricted and stuck living here." I had simply raised an eyebrow, my internal frustration mounting. Hoarding. I was the sole mortgage holder, the man who had laid every shingle and driven every nail into this house. "I settled the mortgage on this property before you were born, David. Let's be honest. What is this truly about?" Lisa, ever the calculating partner, interjected with a thin, unsettling smile. "It's about forward progression, Julian. We intend to modernize the entire space. New travertine flooring, smart home features, luxuries you frankly wouldn't comprehend." I comprehended plenty. The talk of repairs was a flimsy, transparent veil for a massive, unnecessary renovation intended solely to satisfy Lisa's social ambitions. Her phone, positioned perfectly for her to check social media, displayed an image of a custom-made European sofa priced like a small car. "You possess substantial savings, Dad," David pressed, moving closer to me. "What is the purpose of clinging to it? You're not getting any younger." The low blow landed, sharp and intentional, but I kept my gaze steady, tracing a familiar scratch on the tabletop from David's childhood. The memory of the boy who had once idolized me was a cold counterpoint to the man standing before me now. "I provided enough," I stated quietly. "You live here rent-free. That far exceeds what most parents ever give." Lisa's scoff was immediate, dismissive. "Rent-free. This residence is a literal time capsule, Julian. We're doing you a tremendous favor by remaining here." David, escalating, slammed the silver utensil down. "You are utterly selfish. You try to play the martyr, but you are only impeding our future." The accusation of selfishness hit hardest because it was a profound inversion of our reality. I had spent 30 years being the opposite, the provider, the sacrifice. I'd sold my most prized possession, a meticulously restored 1968 classic car, to fund David's college tuition, assuring Catherine it was a necessary investment. I had worked exhaustive, back-breaking overtime shifts in my final years before retirement to build the savings they now coveted. After Catherine's death 3 years prior, I'd been left alone in this large house, and David and Lisa had moved in, ostensibly to keep me company. In reality, they saw an opportunity. The silence that followed David's outburst was deafening. Lisa's eyes gleamed, watching for my reaction. I didn't shout back. Words, I knew, would never penetrate the layers of entitlement and greed they had wrapped around themselves. "Selfish," I repeated, letting the word echo in the sudden quiet. "That's truly what you believe?" "You are absolutely correct," David spat, the stench of wine heavy on his breath. "You are no longer necessary here. Dad, we can manage this place without you." The pronouncement, spoken in the presence of my closest kin and friends, was not merely cruel. It was an act of complete erasure. They thought their emotional violence would result in my immediate surrender. I set my knife down, stood, and watched them, their faces set in twin expressions of certainty and avarice. "I see," I finally said, my voice steady. "Your sentiments have been received." As I turned and walked toward the hall, David called after me, his tone laced with mocking triumph. "What? Is that your whole response? You're just going to run away and sulk?" I did not dignify his taunt with a reply. The front door loomed, a familiar portal. As my hand gripped the cold brass of the doorknob, one thought burned through the initial haze of pain. I have given them everything. No more. The door clicked shut, silencing their muffled, arrogant voices. I stood in the deep, sheltering darkness of the hallway, my breathing steadying. They had mistaken my decades of patience for weakness. They had no idea they had just instigated a war with a man who had built his career on anticipating structural failures. My private study, located on the quieter west side of the house, was my sanctuary. It held the ghost of the life David and Lisa now sought to dismantle. A single desk lamp cast a pool of warm light, illuminating the framed portrait of Catherine. Her soft, knowing smile had always been my compass. I tried, Kath. I whispered, the words rough with unshed emotion. I gave him every opportunity. I sank into my worn armchair, the leather groaning under my weight, and pulled out an old ledger. This wasn't a family album, but a financial one. I opened it to a yellowed entry dated 2005, David's initial college tuition payment, $12,000. I had drained my savings then, assuring Catherine it was an investment in our future, a future where David would be the man who carried on our name, who would share the life we had painstakingly built. Instead, he had brought home Lisa, whose ambition had immediately targeted my assets. After Catherine's passing, the house itself became a monument to her memory. Every chip of paint, every worn floorboard imbued with meaning. They wanted to rip out the living room carpet, her careful choice after weeks of deliberation, calling it tacky. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase the legacy of the woman who had loved them both unconditionally. I looked at David's teenage photo on the shelf. The boy with the temper who always returned with a sheepish apology. That boy was long gone. The man he had become, cold and demanding, egged on by Lisa's insidious greed, deserved no more of my patience or forgiveness. My phone felt cold and alien in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, pausing on Ben Riley's name. Ben, a retired corporate attorney, had been my friend since our days arguing over complex municipal contracts. He was a master of legal demolition, a man who saw the world in terms of actionable clauses and inescapable consequences. I had been their foundation for too long. It was time to build my own new life, a foundation entirely separate from their avarice. The establishment was called the Old Anchor, a dimly lit tavern with a faint, comforting scent of stale beer and old wood smoke. I sat across from Ben, a glass of untouched whiskey before me. I recounted the entire dinner scene, David's theatrics, Lisa's predatory gaze, the final, chilling pronouncement. Ben listened, his expression hardening with every detail. "They are vultures, Julian," Ben finally rasped, setting his empty beer mug down with a firm thud. "They believe they can simply pluck you clean because they perceive you as frail. Are you prepared to permit that?" I slowly swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "No, my days of being permissive are over." Ben's mouth curved into a thin, knowing smile, a smile that promised swift, brutal legal action. "Excellent. Then we target their vital weak points. Money, of course, but also their carefully constructed pride. We find the fracture in their facade." I pulled out my small notebook, already filled with observations from my days living under the same roof. David was a reckless spender, impulsive, always financing new gadgets. Lisa was a meticulous curator of her public image, her ego inextricably linked to a lifestyle she couldn't genuinely afford. They had made this about ownership and control. I would demonstrate what real, earned control looked like. "Legally, Ben," I reiterated, meeting his gaze firmly. "Zero errors. No room for an appeal or negotiation." Spoken like the engineer who caught the city's $6 million math error on the new bridge contract, Ben chuckled, leaning back. "They fundamentally misunderstand who they are dealing with. They see a father. We will show them a corporate adversary." I outlined my initial strategy. David's finances were a desperate shambles. I had discreetly noticed the concealed late notices. That would be our initial leverage point. "You're terrifying, old friend," Ben said, raising his glass in mock salute. "To consequences." The bar hummed around us. I pushed away the fleeting temptation of nostalgia. Sentimental regret was a luxury I could no longer afford. Ben leaned closer. "You must be sure, Julian. Once this process begins, there is no ethical path back. They will hate you permanently." "They made their choice," I replied, my voice steady. "Now I make mine." The plan began to take shape, methodical, precise, and utterly devastating. They had chosen to demolish our relationship. I would simply ensure they paid the full demolition cost, personally. The following night, the kitchen was silent, illuminated only by the faint, clinical glow of my phone's flashlight. I moved with the practiced stealth of someone who knows every floorboard and corner of his own home. David, always careless in his perceived security, had left a haphazard pile of financial documents scattered on the table, bills, credit statements, and a crumpled bank notice. I worked meticulously, my engineer's mind instantly cataloging the disorder. A credit card statement revealed a staggering $12,000 debt, primarily accrued through high-end clothing and expensive dining. Lisa's charges, including a single handbag purchase that exceeded the house's monthly utility bills. They had sneered at my outdated home while bankrupting themselves on fleeting status symbols. My fingers paused on a foreclosure warning, stamped overdue in angry red ink. It concerned a small, secondary condo they had recently purchased as a supposed investment. David had foolishly bragged about its potential during dinner. Now, the bank was threatening repossession. I carefully recorded the account number. This was not just about money. It was about exposing the sheer arrogance of their financial recklessness. A sudden, sharp creak echoed from the hallway. I instantly killed the flashlight, pressing myself against the counter, listening intently. Nothing, just the groaning of an old house. They were upstairs, likely asleep, blissfully unaware they had left the keys to their destruction lying on the kitchen table. I flipped the light back on. Every document was a thread in the web they had spun, and I was mapping its structure, identifying every weak point. The debts were high, the payments delinquent, and the entire operation was being propped up by the assumption of my forthcoming surrender. Their financial house was crumbling. I was simply going to accelerate the process. The kitchen door clicked softly shut behind me. I had everything I needed to wage a winnable war. The law office of Chancery and Wells was a fortress of glass and cool steel, a sharp, clean contrast to the warmth of my home. I sat across from John, my folder spread open like a strategic battle map on the polished obsidian table. John, sharp-featured and wearing a perfectly tailored suit, scanned my meticulously organized notes. Eviction notices, a court order to freeze accounts, and a detailed cross-reference of their undisclosed liabilities. "This is airtight, Julian," John stated, his voice clipped and efficient. "The eviction notice is legally sound, secured by the property trust we established. They will have 30 days to vacate the premises once served. And the joint account freeze is effective immediately." I nodded, signing the final pages. The weight of the pen felt like a formal gavel, sealing their fate. Completely, I thought, pushing away the persistent, painful image of the boy David once was. The first document signed was a revised will, formally excluding David and Lisa and designating all assets to charity. Next, the transfer of the house title into a formal, irrevocable family trust, naming me as the sole trustee. The house, my last bastion, was now entirely untouchable by their greedy hands. I pulled out my phone and placed a call to the bank, locking the joint account that David, in his laziness, had never bothered to close. "You're cutting deep, Julian," John observed, stacking the documents. "They will feel this instantly. They should have considered that before they declared me obsolete." I replied, the steel in my voice steady. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with David's number. 2 missed calls. He was beginning to realize his access to easy money was cut off, even if he didn't yet understand the full reason. Let him panic. This was only the very first tremor. A few days later, the escalation became visible. I returned from an errand to find the front door locks had been changed. My old key, worn smooth from years of use, simply grated uselessly against the new brass cylinder. They had moved with reckless speed, fueled by panic and their attorney's aggressive advice. They weren't just fighting back. They were attempting to physically erase me. Later that day, I received a frantic call from Sarah, Catherine's friend. We met at a quiet, unpretentious cafe. "Julian, I heard something truly awful," Sarah whispered, her face pale with worry. "David and Lisa are planning a massive family dinner, a second gathering. They've invited everyone, your sister, your cousins. They are going to make a formal public announcement. They plan to petition the court to declare you mentally incompetent and force a full conservatorship. They're using the dinner to secure the family support." The final piece of their vile puzzle clicked into place. Public humiliation, cloaked as compassionate concern, to legally strip me of my rights and my assets. I sat back, the fire in my chest roaring. They had given me a stage, a captive audience, and a clear date for their final, humiliating stand. I pulled out my phone and typed a note. Christmas dinner, public announcement, incompetence/guardianship. They were counting on my emotional collapse. I would give them a surprise instead. The second, final Christmas dinner was an exercise in theatrical tension. The old maple table, now immaculately set with Catherine's heirloom china, was surrounded by my family and friends. Linda, my cousins, and Sarah, all observing me with an uneasy mix of pity and suspicion. Thanks to David and Lisa's carefully crafted lies. David stood at the head, holding a wine glass, his smile too bright, too confident. Lisa sat beside him, perfectly poised, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I sat opposite, my hands folded, the manila folder, heavy with the ironclad truth, tucked securely beneath my chair. David cleared his throat, the room falling into a profound silence. "Thank you all for attending," he began, his voice practiced, dripping with fake sincerity. "This Christmas must be about unity, about facing hard realities." He then delivered his rehearsed line, the same words he had used days ago, but now amplified by the public audience. "Dad, we've made the painful but necessary decision. You are not well. This house, your life, it's too much for you. We voted, and you are no longer welcome here. It's time for you to leave for your own protection. A collective, stunned gasp filled the room. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin, Tom, frowned, his expression darkening with doubt. Lisa's smile widened, sharp and cold. They waited for my complete, humiliating breakdown. I rose slowly, deliberately, the sound of my chair scraping the wood floor, feeling monumental. Every eye was locked on me. Is that so, David? I said, my voice steady, almost conversational. Yes, Dad. David smirked, emboldened by the silence. It is for your own good. You'll eventually express gratitude. I reached under the chair and pulled out the manila folder. Its mundane cover drew every curious glance. I stepped forward, holding the folder out to David, placing it directly into his hands. A farewell present, and I said, my tone light but edged with lethal finality. Open it. David, his confidence flickering, tore the folder open. His eyes scanned the first page. A court-ordered eviction notice, demanding he and Lisa vacate the property within 30 days. His breath hitched, his hand trembling as he flipped to the next document. A court order freezing all their shared accounts, followed by the meticulous, devastating list of their debts, their lies, and the full transcript of their recorded plot to have me declared incompetent. What is this filth? David screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. The folder slipped from his fingers, paper scattering onto the pristine white tablecloth. Lisa snatched a page, her face instantly turning chalk white as she read the legal language. This is an utter fabrication, she hissed, but her voice was a tremor. The guests immediately surged forward, grabbing the scattered papers. Linda read a bank statement, her eyes widening in horror. Sarah snatched a copy of the recorded plot transcript. David, is this true? Linda demanded, waving the bank notice. You told us Julian was losing his mind, but this clearly details your plan to steal his property. David stammered, his glass clattering to the floor, wine spreading like blood on the tablecloth. It's not what it looks like. I stepped back, allowing the engineered chaos to unfold. The folder was my weapon, and it had detonated perfectly. Lisa's composure shattered completely. David was already dissolving into panic. You lied to us. Sarah shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at Lisa. You spread malicious rumors, all so you could rob him. The room erupted into shouts, recriminations, and horrified murmurs. David lunged with scattered evidence, but Linda pulled it away. Enough, David. You have eternally shamed this entire family. He turned to me, his voice a broken plea. Dad, please tell them it's a massive mistake. We didn't truly mean it like that. I met his gaze, my expression unwavering. You meant every single word, David. I said, my voice quiet but firm. You chose your path. Now, you must live with the consequences of that choice. Lisa grabbed his arm, her eyes desperate. Julian, we are deeply sorry. We will fix all of this. Just please, don't do this to us. I shook my head, stepping away from the scene of their collapse. You had years to fix your character. You chose greed instead. I turned and walked toward the living room, the noise of their pleas and the guests' accusations fading behind me. I paused at the wall, straightening the last photo of Catherine. I had been an engineer, a builder of lasting structures. They had built a monument of lies, and I had ensured its spectacular, complete destruction. The front door slammed shut as the first guest fled. I stood in the dark, the silence finally settling over the house. David and Lisa were still in there, arguing, begging, but it was over. My new apartment, high above the frantic, illuminated Chicago skyline, was small, its walls bare, but its quiet was a profound comfort. I sat at a simple desk, a blank page before me. The house was sold, the closing finalized, every signature a step toward freedom. David and Lisa had vanished, clearing their possessions before the eviction deadline, leaving behind only the cold ashes of their ambition. I had not heard from them, and I did not expect to. I began to write a final, simple note. Michael, I wrote, my handwriting steady. I forgive you. Not because you earned it, but because I need to shed your weight and move on with my own life. This is a final farewell. Forgiveness was not a gift for them. It was the final, necessary act of self-preservation for me. The city lights twinkled below, soft and winking to the falling snow. I had built a life once, one filled with warmth and dreams. That life was over, but I was still standing, ready to build a new one. I stood, my coat already on, the envelope tucked safely inside. The post office was a short walk. I would mail the letter tonight, a final tether cut. The apartment door clicked shut behind me. I stepped into the elevator, my boots leaving faint prints on the clean floor. The snow would continue to fall, covering the old, broken paths, making way for new ones. And I was finally, profoundly ready to walk them. If you like this extended story, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your impressions in the comment below. Thank you for listening.